Hi everyone, I'm Julien Redmond. I'm the General Manager of Certus Insights. I have with me here today Nols Ebersohn, who is Principal Architect and Data Vault 2 Trainer at Certus as well. We wanted to talk to you today a little bit about a recent proof of concept we did with a customer in Southeast Asia, where we managed to use the IBM Cloud Pak for data platform, as well as the Data Vault 2.0 methodology, and talk through some of the benefits and the speed that we managed to achieve in this POC. Hi, Nols.
Hi, Julien, and welcome to our listeners.
So I think we wanted to start and have a chat about what we managed to actually achieve. I think this is a great slide to sort of set it all up. In the space of a week, we managed to, I think, bring a couple of sources in and take it through the Data Vault methodology.
Indeed. So within this week, it used the necessary scalable infrastructure to spin up the environment, been able to deploy the necessary artifacts to allow us to facilitate the proof of concept. There were some initial discussions around the nature of the business and how it works to complement the methodology with encapsulated in Data Vault 2.0, allowing us to then progress systematically through to producing all the way from ingestion all the way to the actual rendering of that information in an information mart level within just a few days. And so the patterns, the automation, and the methodology all playing a fundamental part to smooth the road for the technical implementation. And yes, we've been able to introduce a few source systems and so on as an example, and those may be ready for production in due course, but as far as the code base is concerned, the code base is ready for production, which can then therefore build thereafter in an incremental fashion, once again in the standard agile practices embedded in Data Vault 2 as a method.
So in this POC, we within really 4 days, I guess, once the infrastructure was set up, we managed to bring in two sources, build a business vault artifact and some information mart artifacts, and really actually provide them a reporting asset within the 4 days from day 2 to day 6. Really, is that fair?
That is fair, and it is important to understand that this is only possible because the decoupling nature of both at the information architecture level as well as the application and platform architecture level. You mentioned business vault there, and that includes business rules, and so being very specific and very mindful on where and how it interacts in the architecture is a critical success factor for this type of rapid deployment.
Great. So moving maybe onto our next slide, just to talk a little bit about the actual Data Vault methodology. Do you want to talk us through just the kind of the high level hits of what DV2 is and how it helps?
Absolutely. So fundamentally, what the Data Vault 2 methodology is bringing to the table is encapsulated in the 3 pillars we see in the slides there. There's a very strong methodology side, which gives us the repeatable patterns, the consistency and deployment, the possibility to automate a large number of the typical tasks that you would encounter in any given deployment, supported by an architecture that allows for multiple tiers, not just a 3-tier or a 4-tier architecture, but multiple tiers, because as you go along and real-time streams become important in your organization, having fewer and fewer tiers are very advantageous to reduce the drag or the lag in information delivery that may come across. And that scale is exceedingly important. And so the principles of good, strong architectural design of separation of concern and decoupling plays out very much so in not only the platform architecture, but the process architecture, the modeling, the information architecture that it's supported. So all of this is ably supported, what is probably more widely known under the Data Vault 2 banner as the actual model, given that it's had particularly unique features. But it essentially builds out in a hub and spoke design. Now, there are basically only three entity types in the model side for Data Vault, and one is around the business keys, and therefore this is the primary integration point of all of the information within your Data Vault. And then we formally expose and track the relationships as opposed to an implicit design element that's typical of other methodologies. And then we track the descriptive details in the satellites, where we record the time-dependent information that either describes the relationship or the business key. And this, for the first time, is allowing us to decouple at an information architecture level the data and the information that we curate within the Data Vault environment or in any warehouse and analytics environment.
Cool. So if we jump on to actually what we did in the POC, I think we obviously mentioned that we started with a session with the team, and then we actually stood up the infrastructure. But from the first day that we actually had our hands on the data, what did we do? How did we get started?
The very first thing we did is we had a chat to the subject matter experts, understood the data to some degree as to understand, obviously, the behaviors and the relationships. The actual content becomes less important from a mechanistic perspective. From a business perspective, the content is obviously very important, but from a platform warehouse mechanistic perspective, the content is not really that relevant. What is really important is understanding your business keys and the relationships between those. If you encapsulate those elements in and how they influence the patterns that Data Vault is operating on, then that drives all of the implementation very quickly from these are the necessary metadata elements that we've added, which we've highlighted in the little red box on the screen, which then helps to the further downstream processing into the relevant hubs, links, and satellites or business keys, relationships, descriptive details. So this understanding of the data is the most important step in this process, but the moment you don't have to be that exhaustive to know every single little detail of every single column, but it's important to understand what their role is. Extremely important to understand their role. If they're in a descriptive in nature, we know exactly where they go. If they are a business key as such, which is easily identifiable and verifiable through how business processes interact and how the golden thread is threaded through all of the different data sets, that is where the absolute strength of Data Vault comes to the fore in formalizing those relationships and business keys in those entities. And that makes the rest of the architecture flow very quickly and very easy, because there's only one or three decisions. Is the business key? Yes, it is. Is there a relationship? Yes, there is. The rest is descriptive detail. So the decisions are fast-tracked in as far as the patterns that are encapsulated and available in Data Vault.
So in this first day, we managed to create the initial model and load the first source systems data into the model.
Correct. And that was because the patterns already exist. The patterns are available. The technology is ready. It is basically a configuration task.
And so then day two, we did the same thing again with the second source, I think?
That's correct. On day two, we added another source. But this is typically where most deployments get into some grief, because you don't know what the future holds. And then as such, designing for change is really hard unless you use a paradigm like Data Vault that is designed for change, and therefore it integrated the new set of data set. In this case, we just added additional details to an existing relationship, but there was no requirement to re-engineer any of the existing elements. And this is where the consistent cadence of delivery is protected within your initiative to allow you to keep on adding and expanding without re-engineering. And this is a key element that is one of the key benefits of deploying Data Vault 2 in your warehouse environment. It minimizes the amount of re-engineering that could occur over time. And this is what will allow the data warehouse or the data vault to persist over a long period of time.
And so I guess moving on to the next slide, it kind of shows the process that we step through. We obviously have a set of assets that deploy onto IBM's data stage platform that sits on the Cloud Pak for Data system. We also use some of the other bits, Fast Track, I believe, for mapping that metadata and feeding it into that automation framework.
That's correct. So very strongly featuring throughout the Data Vault methodology as a basic requirement, but also within the IBM toolset, is the emphasis on strong metadata. And so by virtue of the definition of the role the particular elements play, the mapping that is part of the configuration drives the full infrastructure that then not only instantiate, but run and maintain your data vault structures. So the concept of strong metadata and a strong metadata platform is absolutely key for any given environment, whether data vault or not. But because of the pattern-based elements, allows for absolute ease of automation, complete repeatability, and it also makes a very important productivity statement, because every time you add a new team member to your organization, to your teams as such, you are getting the benefits of a simplified process. And therefore, the process to deploy is easily transferable. It is not, it sort of takes out that deep technical knowledge requirement on an ongoing basis, and therefore de-risks for the organization significantly on expanding or retaining talent within teams.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess what we've managed to do in the space of just a couple of days in the POC here is create a model, bring in the first source, extend the model, bring in the second source, use all the automation that we've developed that sits on top of the IBM platform. And then that feeds the governance layer as well. So we get lineage and support for information governance out of that as well.
Absolutely, because as part of any well-founded platform, governance is key. And so being able to expose that governance, not only from a basic glossary, business interaction, business layer on top of the technical assets, but then start tracking and seeing from a lineage perspective where the elements are originating from, is also key, as most regulated organizations these days must prove from where the information originated from.
I think we've got some slides with some images of that. There you go. So there's I guess what the lineage produced out of the POC looks like, or one of the lineage diagrams anyway. So this would be loading from a source through to the vault?
Correct. So this is both describing to which satellites the information was funneled, to which relationships, or which relationships were encapsulated, which business keys participated, and then what is exposed to the end user in due course is suitably also mapped out through that process. So the important part of this whole framework is there was no additional work required by any of the analysts or designers or modelers to achieve this, because this is a fundamental part of a strong metadata framework. And so it's sort of the backbone of your governance, allows this to occur. So the drudgery is taken care of and the utility is provided up front.
It's interesting you mentioned those roles. I think it's probably worth pointing out to the audience as well that this POC was actually done with just one individual working with this data set over this week. So so then moving into Business Vault, I think is probably where we head to next. And maybe we'll get you to talk a little bit around what actually Business Vault and where the Business Rules Engine sits with DB2.
So in DB2, there is the Data Vault. That is your enterprise data warehouse framework. Within the data vault, there are two logical areas. Note logical, because they sit side by side. It's not another layer. We have the raw vault, which encapsulates and records the facts as they exist, as they were implemented in your upstream systems, and provides a full audit trail with complete fidelity of the original inputs. Business Vault only exists if you have the need to apply additional rules to either derive, fix, or calculate other elements that are either missing or somewhat suboptimal from a business perspective. And that then allows us, if we decouple the actual warehouse platform from the business rules engine, allows us great flexibility on the number and the type of business rules engines that we can accommodate. And it also means that the platform does not have to suffer from artificial maintenance cadence over time as you need to upgrade a particular rules technology with the warehouse if the two are tightly coupled. So this process of taking from the vault, doing the necessary, sometimes normalization, sometimes denormalization, sometimes conformance or quality as elements or absolutely new calculated elements, making that available as a data set to leverage through exactly the same templates and automation frameworks that the raw information went through. The now derived data goes and lives in the Business Vault. So Business Vault is not a new layer. It's simply just a logical grouping for derived data. It allows it, and there's no new data or old data or raw data is in the Business Vault because they live side by side. So you have both raw and derived right next to each other, and it becomes very apparent to the end user as to when and how those values have transitioned over time. And so that transparency is absolutely critical. As you then expose it in information marts, you have all the information required at your fingertips.
So I think the next slide talks about what we actually did in the POC, which from memory, it was a risk score calculation was the rule that was used to create a Business Vault record. So we sourced data from some of the raw vault tables and then ran through that rule and created the Business Vault table.
Correct. So all the rule needed to do was read from the vault, so all the facts in their time context readily available. So whether it's a time series analysis or whether that is a single point in time analysis, both of those scenarios are well supported. The business rules engine essentially did the calculation, produced a result. That result was similarly modeled, similarly ingested, and similarly automated to any other raw information elements, and therefore the whole the process to get it to your data vault, the business rules engine did not have to worry about the warehouse work. That is done by the warehouse. And the warehouse didn't have to worry about the business rule work because that's what the business rule engine does. And so that decoupling or separation of concern is a critical success factor in both scaling and maintaining over time the elements. So in this flow, we went from a little bit from right to left here, from the raw vault into the rules engine producing a result. That result was then tagged with the necessary elements like metadata elements to ingest into the vault and manifested itself as new information in Business Vault.
That's great. So that was day 3 of the POC, I guess, or day 3 with the data. And that Business Vault table was produced, calculated and produced in that day. I think then the next day we got onto information marts, which is going to be the next slide. Can you explain what an information mart is to start with?
So the information mart is a particular view with a particular use case in mind. In this case, we have a star schema or dimensional model that is exposing for slice and dice purposes, slice and dice use case, the information that was captured within the vault. Now you can see that the bubbles around may encapsulate a couple of entities that constitute either a dimension or a fact. And this is where the benefit of the data vault comes in play, because now we can choose very specifically which elements from which systems we can expose into our dimensions. Now note that the information mark here is purely for the use case. It carries no what's called burden of proof. All of the necessary data that needs to be held in place that forms part of your audit is either encapsulated in Raw Vault or Business Vault, and none of those calculations are embedded in the information mark. There are some things in the information mark that's bespoke to an information mark, like, rules around navigation hierarchies, ratios, time comparisons, this year, that year. But those type of functional rules happily exist in your information mark, bespoke to the particular use case that is required to be delivered to the end user. So this allows us to then extend the delivery of information to any number of different consumption tools without having to have the same rule set embedded in a number of different tools. And this allows us then to decouple the information delivery from the information manufacturing and curating. And so where the burden of proof lies is within the warehouse, within the data vault, and where the use case is delivered to is delivered in the information mark.
Very cool. So, look, I guess probably just wrapping this up, on the IBM Cloud Pak for Data platform and infrastructure, we deployed our data vault assets that do the automation, the code automation, and the metadata management. And so within the first day, we ingested the first source. Day 2, the second source. Day 3, a business vault record. Day 4, created the information mark, which allowed them to connect a BI tool and do a view of that data and a prototype report. So within the space of a week, we've stood up infrastructure, we've deployed assets, we've actually ingested data and created what could effectively be customers' first slice of their data warehouse.
Indeed. The other enablers that come with this type of pattern-based delivery is the fact that it enables pattern-based testing. And so automated testing goes with the automated delivery and deployment, goes as far as depending on what kind of orchestration framework you use, hopefully something that is metadata, where allows you to then, again, continue to scale and to automate across your CI/CD or continuous deployment, continuous integration efforts, integration, orchestration. All of it really, really benefits from the pattern-based elements that are absolutely core to the data vault approach. Most traditional ways of going about these things, every build is a bespoke process. And therefore getting to the point where you are accelerating and overtaking demand or requirements never comes in the traditional sense. And this is why we struggle with traditional warehousing approaches. This allows us to get ahead of the curve and allows us to then deliver the value business is expecting, as opposed to waiting in the wings for things to eventually arrive. And so the benefits are real.
Well, thanks, Nols. Thanks for taking us through how that POC came together. I think it's a really good example of what can be done quickly. And if anyone who watches this and joined us today would like to hear a little bit more, you can obviously get in touch with Certus. We'd love to talk to you about Data Vault, about the IBM Cloud Pak platform, and the assets that we've developed that help people to deliver agile data warehousing. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.